Well, I think we should get started. I'm Bob Nerum, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, this year's Petit Institute Distinguished Lecturer. Just a slight bit of background on this lecture. We decided a couple years ago that we would have a single event each year beyond our normal scientific and technical and engineering seminars that really allowed someone to come in and paint a bigger picture and bring us a vision as to what's going on and where things are going. Our first distinguished lecturer last fall was Dr. Kenneth Shine, then president of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences. And this year we're very fortunate to have Mr. Art Collins, who is the chairman and CEO of Medtronic, the largest medical device company in the world. Georgia Tech and Medtronic have had an evolving, ever stronger relationship, and Medtronic has been tremendously supportive of what we try to do. They are one of our industrial partners. But this is actually the first time that Art Collins has been on the Georgia Tech campus, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Art. Art was basically born and grew up in Ohio, went to a wonderful little state college called Miami University of Ohio. That's just a first-rate liberal arts college. Did a little stint in the Navy and somehow worked it out in the Navy that he could spend some time at Penn and get a Master's of Business Administration at the Wharton School while he was teaching undergraduates at Penn. Then launched his career with Booz Allen Hamilton, then Abbott Laboratories, and in 1992 joined Medtronic. In 1994 he became the Chief Operating Officer, in 1996 the President, 2001 the CEO, and now just 6 months ago in April 2002 was named Chairman. As I mentioned to him earlier today, I said, I just don't know where you're going to go from here. But Medtronic has been an inspired company, and that has been in part due to inspired leadership. And Medtronic is very fortunate to have Art Collins as its new chairman and CEO. We at Georgia Tech are very fortunate to have Art Collins here today to talk to us about sustaining growth in medical technology. Art, I welcome you, I thank you, and we're all looking forward to your talk.
Give me just a moment while I get wired here. Okay. All right. Well, can you hear me okay? Good. Well, thank you very much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here at Georgia Tech at the Petit Lecture Series. As I told a group earlier this morning, I was particularly eager to arrive here. I got in late yesterday. When I got up yesterday morning, it was one of the few days I've been back in the Twin Cities in Minnesota in the last few weeks. I got up, I turned the television set on, and was promptly informed it was 29 degrees. So beyond the weather, it's also good to be here. I've been in and out of Atlanta a number of different times, but as Bob said earlier, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to be on the Georgia Tech campus. I do get an opportunity to visit a number of campuses around the United States, lots of times because there are major academic medical centers associated with those campuses, and I will tell you that you're very fortunate. You have more new construction or construction underway here than I've seen in just about anywhere else on any other campus, and that is one measure of progress. I was very pleased to accept Bob's kind offer to come down here and address you today, but when he asked me to be the lecturer today, the first question I asked him was, why me? And Bob paused for a second, and he said that Medtronic had done a number of wonderful things over the years, had been a strong supporter of Georgia Tech, And he said, by the way, I've done a little research, and I found out in the last 11 years or so that you've been with Medtronic, you've occasionally displayed a little bit of good judgment along the way. And I said, thank you, Bob. But when he mentioned good judgment, I was immediately struck by the story of Averell Harriman at the end of his distinguished career. He was asked at a press conference to what he attributed his tremendous success, to which he very quickly answered, good judgment. Another reporter in the back of the room raised a hand and said, Mr. Ambassador, how did you come about good judgment? He thought for a moment, and he answered, experience. To which a small cub reporter in the back of the room asked, but Mr. Ambassador, how did you get the experience? To which he very quickly answered, bad judgment. And I will tell you that over my career, I've had my share of good and bad judgment, so please take my comments today as one person's perspective. During our annual shareholders conference, which we held last month in Minneapolis, and we had approximately 200 buy and sell side analysts from Wall Street and other locations, and we beamed it out to thousands of others. We had the topic for that conference be sustainable growth. And I'd like to talk about that subject this morning. And I'd like to preface my remarks by really underscoring the word sustainable, because I'm really not going to talk today about growth that is directed at a short period of time, and it's really focused on growth over a longer term. And some companies have growth strategies in place that will take them to a point of time where they go public, or perhaps when they become acquired, and God forbid, perhaps to a point where the current CEO retires. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. The type of growth that I'd like to discuss is the type that is sustainable over a long period of time. I'm going to talk about some of the characteristics I've seen in companies that have been able to do this over periods of years and in some case decades. While my experience is, as you've heard from Bob's background, heavily weighted toward the medical industry, I do think that some of the characteristics I'll talk to today cross industries and cross geographic boundaries, and perhaps may even be applicable in the non-commercial area. I considered how to structure my remarks today, and I've decided to break them into two basic categories. First, I'm going to discuss some of the attributes that successful growth companies have displayed irrespective of the industry they're in, and they've been important in the present and going forward. And I think of these attributes as the basic blocking and tackling efforts that any company or any institution that grows over an extended period of time needs to be aware of. And then I will take some time to talk about three significant trends I believe that will increasingly shape success in the medical device and technology industry, in the industry in which I participate. We've all seen seemingly very well-run companies stumble and fall. Not that they weren't executing on the basics well, but they really missed some unanticipated change. They couldn't react fast enough to either changing conditions in technology, changing environmental conditions, even though they may have been executing on the basics well. But first, let's talk about some of the basics, and I'm going to start with the organization's culture. To sustain growth, the entire organization, from top to bottom, needs to be committed to grow. Now, this may seem obvious, but many companies that have headed down the slippery slope to stagnation really have started by lowering their expectations. We found that growth is not always linear. In many cases, it's anything but linear, but it is always a constant. Growth companies incorporate growth into their corporate objectives. They include aggressive growth targets. These end up to be not only organizational targets, but also targets of individuals. Growth is planned for, and resources are allocated accordingly. Growth is talked about inside the company and outside the company. It is viewed as a stake that's put in the ground that can't be removed. In short, limited growth or no growth simply is not acceptable. Having said that, I think it goes without saying, particularly in today's post-Enron environment, that growth needs to be real. It can't be manufactured and it can't be illusionary. At Medtronic, we've always taken seriously the responsibility to report our performance accurately with a great deal of transparency. For your information, as Bob indicated, as the largest medical device and technology company in the world, we've had and continue to have very clearly stated growth objectives where we plan to grow a minimum of 15% on the top and the bottom line over any 5-year period. And we've met or exceeded that objective over the last 2 decades. An important part of the culture at Medtronic and any growth company is the will to win. Growth companies, make no mistake about it, are very competitive and they do not like to lose. Again, this starts at the top, but it permeates the whole organization. Vince Lombardi once said, winning isn't everything, but wanting to win is. And let me stress, along with my previous comment, that the will to win needs to be continuous. A quick, apparent win that sacrifices the future, in my book, isn't winning at all. Also, and particularly in today's environment, it's important that you win by the rules. We've recently seen what happens to some companies that bend or break the rules, and in the end, these type of organizations lose, and they lose big time. They are either not around or they are a shadow of what they formerly were. An important aspect of the will to win by the rules is the flip side of the coin. That's not giving up when you're losing. We've seen this particularly played out at Medtronic, where we had to stick in the game until a new product or a new therapy was introduced. And that's been a critical element of our success over the longer term. As Winston Churchill said in 1941, and this is one of my favorite quotes, never, 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 never give up. The culture of a growth company also embraces change. Change isn't just tolerated and accepted, it really is encouraged. Growth companies have a bias for action, and they have a passion to continually reinvent themselves. And they figured out a common overused phrase that the only constant is in fact change itself. That's very easy to say, but it is hard to put into practice because most people are very uncomfortable with change. And basically, I believe it's because of the fear of unknown and the fear of failure. However, the most significant fear that I think leaders of growth organizations have is that they won't change rapidly enough. They won't adapt to either changes in the marketplace, their customers' needs, technology, whatever drives change in their particular organization. The final defining aspect of a growth culture, in my mind, is a tremendous focus on your customers. Customers are not only invited in, you go out and visit them. You always listen to what they have to say. This starts with the CEO of a company, but it permeates the whole organization. Growth companies tend to be interested in what they're doing well, but they're more interested in what is not going well or what could be improved. They go out and they visit accounts they don't have, rather than simply going back and spending time with their old friends where they're doing well. They focus on their customers' needs and what they will be in the future, rather than simply trying to meet today's expectations. And the importance of a growth culture was recognized very early at Medtronic by our founder, Earl Bakken. In fact, when Earl wrote the mission statement of Medtronic back in 1960, before mission statements were commonplace, much of what he wrote was really directed at ensuring the health and success of Medtronic over the long time, and I'm going to come back to that point in just a moment. While the culture of a growth company is extremely important, there are other very important attributes. While this may seem somewhat obvious, growth companies tend to position themselves in growth markets. Warren Buffett had it right when he said that good jockeys will do well on good horses, but not on broken down nags. And we've been very fortunate to be well positioned in the healthcare sector, which represents a very large and growing market. U.S. healthcare expenditures right now make up approximately 14% of gross domestic product, and that's close to $1.5 trillion. And the government expects that spending is going to reach about $2.6 trillion, or about 16% of GDP by the year 2010. Our business is to provide improved and cost-effective solutions for large chronic disease states. Within markets that we currently operate in, our biggest business is in cardiovascular and cardiac problems, although we have major franchises in neurological and spinal disorders, and most recently have moved into the treatment of a very large disease state, one that's growing very rapidly, and that's diabetes. Changing demographics really play into favor for our products. In the U.S. alone, the number of individuals aged 65 and over is expected to double by the year 2025 as all the baby boomers, of which I'm right at the leading edge of, mature and grow older. Even though the events of September 11th and the ongoing global recession and the loss of confidence in corporate America have significantly changed the world and the environment in which we conduct our business, the medical device and technology industry has been fairly resistant to major economic downturns or unrest around the world. And not that that will not affect the business going forward, but we tend to be fairly recession resistant. Not only do growth companies generally participate in attractive growth markets, they tend to establish market leadership positions in the vast majority of the segments in which they operate. And perhaps this is just another variation on the will to win theme, but market leadership really does bring many benefits. Market leaders are able to invest more resources in sustaining their growth than do their competitors. They also gain from the aura of being number one, which is hard to quantify, but it does exist. At Medtronic, we are the leader in most all of the market segments in which we participate, and we work hard in enhancing our position. We have an objective to be number one in every single market segment in which we are operating in. However, there is a danger if you simply focus on your competitors, particularly if you are already number one. At Medtronic, we pay a tremendous amount of attention to our competition, and we take every competitor very seriously. But our corporate mission is to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And that mission continually reminds us that the enemy really isn't our competition. It's the various disease states against which our products and therapies are directed. In fact, the major objective that we have is to improve upon ourselves. As Jim Collins and Jerry Porras pointed out in their book, Built to Last, good enough never is. So we're constantly in the mode of improving, irrespective of how good we think we are. Companies that deliver sustainable growth generally invest heavily in their futures. At the same time, they're disciplined and they expand into areas where they can add value and leverage some existing capability. Last year, Medtronic R&D expenditures grew 12% to $646 million, and right now we are currently annualizing R&D expenditures at about $250 million. Over the last 5 years, internal R&D efforts have been supplemented by 13 strategic acquisitions. This investment in our future is paid out, and I was mentioning this earlier today to a group, where about 2/3 of the revenue that we are currently generating come from products that have been introduced within the last 2 years. So you can see how important this new product development and the R&D equation is to our future. With a strong slate of new products that we currently have in place, I think this percentage can even increase over the next year or so. However, whether directing internal R&D efforts or implementing an acquisition strategy, companies that go too far afield generally get into trouble. Witness what recently happened with companies like Enron, Global Crossing, WorldCom, and Tyco. The real problem, as far as I'm concerned, with what happened with Enron wasn't the lack of financial controls. That was a contributing problem. The real problem is they got into an area that had nothing to do with their original business, and they couldn't really add value, and that led them down to that slippery slope, and we all know how that finished. Earl Bakken, our founder, recognized this when he wrote our mission statement back in 1960. He said, and I'm going to quote, "Direct growth in the area of biomedical engineering where we display maximum strength and ability," and this is the important one, "and avoid participation in areas where we cannot make unique or worthy contributions." It's just as important for Medtronic to know where we will operate as well as where we will not. Great growth companies have found a way to consistently meet challenging expectations, and they've developed a track record for success. We focus on this at Medtronic, and we're proud that over the last decade we've exceeded our stated growth objectives, and we've increased our revenues and our profits at a compound annual rate of 17% and 22% respectively. As I mentioned earlier, growth isn't always linear, but we've worked hard not to disappoint our customers, our employees, and then finally our investors. One final attribute of growth companies that will endure into the future is really the most important one of all. Great growth companies have great people. I've said this on many occasions that people really do make the difference. Great growth companies work hard on attracting and retaining and developing talent. They give talented people an opportunity to succeed. This doesn't happen by accident. It takes a lot of hard work, but the payoff is well worth it. While setting the right vision is a very important aspect of success, and getting the right people and in the right positions, I believe, is just as important, since great visions with mediocre people tend to produce mediocre results. As proud as I am of the current team we've assembled at Medtronic, we are continually working to improve our human resource equation. Some people come from within, and occasionally we'll need to go outside. In fact, we about a year ago were able to attract in one of the key business leaders in this area, Bill Hawkins, who was the CEO of Novost here in Atlanta. Your loss, our gain, and he's doing a tremendous job for us. All right. If you buy what I've just discussed, you're probably asking yourself, well, what's going to be different in the future? So I'd like to now move into the second part of my remarks, or as Paul Harvey says, and now for the rest of the story. We all know that there are many changes that are going to impact high-tech companies and successful growth companies going forward, and they're going to need to be nimble on a myriad of different fronts. However, in the next 10 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is to discuss some of the trends that I think will impact Medtronic's future performance and the medical device and technology industry. And I'd like to focus on three trends. The first of these trends is the impact of converging technologies, an issue that all of you, I think, should be very interested in. The second trend is the changing requirements for market development and successful new product introductions. And the third trend is increasing need for creative partnerships to ensure success. All right, the first trend recognizes the significant convergence of several technologies that, when properly combined, will result in improved, cost-effective patient outcomes. These converging technologies offer the potential for better solutions across a broad range of medical care and the continuum from wellness to early diagnosis to risk stratification to surgical or interventional procedures to postoperative patient monitoring. Incorporating technological advances into medical devices will remain an extremely important part of our future success. These advances will continue to provide traditional medical device technology such as device miniaturization, longevity, improved physiological sensors and diagnosis, advanced biomaterials, and more efficient and less invasive ways to deliver therapy with a number of other benefits. These advances in traditional medical technology will be increasingly complemented by two additional technological thrusts. The first one is biotechnology. Medtronic has historically incorporated biologics and substances that elicit a biologic response into many of our products. We've been coating pacemaker leads with steroids for better performance. We've been chemically coating tissue heart valves for longevity and oxygenators for better outcomes. We've delivered therapeutic compounds through some of our implantable drug pumps. So this isn't a new area for Medtronic. But going forward, new device biologic combinations will become much more prevalent. For example, based on compelling data, the FDA recently approved a genetically engineered protein that successfully replaces harvested bone in spinal fusions. And this is very important. Our product, which is called the Infuse bone graft, is a recombinant human bone morphogenic protein. And what it allows you to do is to combine this with a little cylindrical cage that goes in between the two vertebrae and then causes bone growth and fusion. And it allows you not to have to go in with a painful and costly second surgery to harvest bone out of the hip of the patient. Good medical outcomes and very cost effective. Another recent example of a drug-device combination includes a drug being used with a coronary stent. And this reduces restenosis, or the reclosing of the artery after angioplasty. And we're one of several companies that is pursuing this technology. Site-specific delivery of new drugs and biotech agents will also be part of this unfolding story. And we're very excited about our implantable infusion pump's ability to deliver compounds for the treatment of pain, neurological disorders, diabetes, and significant health problems. In addition to biotechnology, the other complementary technology that will be important to us going forward is information technology. Many of our devices currently have very sophisticated computing and communication technologies incorporated in the devices. And with the explosion of information technology, our devices will increasingly offer expanded information and remote monitoring options. In addition, the Internet will play a much more important role in the future transmission of key patient information. We have a new CareLink system that allows individual patient conditions to be monitored in a remote location. Think about this. You have a pacemaker or an implantable cardioverter defibrillator or an implantable neuro device that you can be in a room like this and have a remote monitor continually monitoring that device, not only to ensure that the device is performing well, but monitoring physiological functions. That information can be then downlinked through a modem to a secure server, captured, and then a physician can get on the Internet and access that information from a remote location. Again, timely information transfer and very cost effective. Let me shift now to the second trend, and it involves the changing definition of what makes for a successful new product or therapy introduction. This is particularly important because successful growth companies don't just introduce new products into existing markets, they create whole new markets. As an investor, Peter Bernstein writes in his analysis of growth companies versus growth stocks, and I quote, "The ability to create its own market is the strategic, the dominating, and the single most important distinguishing characteristic of a growth company." The key point here is if you want patients that have a need for your product to obtain access to the product, it's no longer enough to develop the product and say, here it is. Today, it's an increasingly complex, multi-step process that is required to ensure that a new product or therapy is adopted as the standard of care in a timely manner. The goal can simply be stated in two words: patient access. The previous focus has been on reducing the cycle time for the product development activity, as well as moving that product through regulatory clinical trials. And while these two elements are very important going forward, it's extremely important that we go much beyond that. And much beyond that includes the appropriate cost-benefit outcome studies that provide the new product with a definition of good medicine and cost-effective medicine. It includes not only the regulatory approval from the FDA and other regulatory bodies around the world, but also getting adequate reimbursement for hospitals, for physicians, and for other people involved with the delivery of care. Required training doesn't just apply to the sales force and the physicians who will use the products. It extends to the education of those physicians that will diagnose and refer patients to specialists. It also involves communicating not only with physicians, but also with patients and their families who are becoming much more proactive in managing the health care of themselves and their loved ones. This has to be done in a responsible way, but it is going to be an important part of the future, and we're effectively utilizing public relations to a degree we've never utilized before. We have a number of web-based communication formats rather than existing consumer advertising. In fact, some of you may have seen earlier this week, if you watched the Today Show where they had Jerry Lewis on and Katie Couric was doing an interview, Jerry Lewis talked about one Medtronic product. It was a neurostimulator to treat pain. I don't know if you know the history of Jerry Lewis, but because he was doing all these pratfalls early in his career, he damaged his back significantly, got addicted to pain pills, almost died from that, was cleaned up, but he still had this intractable pain, and he was very close to taking his life. Dr. DeBakey down in Houston recommended one of our devices, which is a pacemaker-type product that has its leads go into the spinal cord, basically gave him his life back without pain. Now he's an evangelist. We have to quiet him down periodically from what he wants to say. I'd like to give you an example of one product in this regard. It's a very important product. It's a biventricular pacemaker that treats heart failure, and I think it's a very good case study. In August of 2001, we became the first company to receive FDA approval for a pacemaker that paces both sides of the heart to treat congestive heart failure. The product's name is InSync. And I will tell you, it bears no resemblance to the musical group other than both are very popular. The FDA approval was significant, but to really understand this, the effort really started years in advance. We consulted with leading medical researchers in the United States and Europe to ensure that the product was correctly designed prior to the European launch of InSync in August of 1998. Now remember that when you think about how efficient the FDA is. But this started back in the mid-90s. Product was initially introduced in Europe in 1998. We met with the FDA repeatedly in order to anticipate what questions they would have and helping to design our U.S. clinical trials. We carefully managed the clinical trials to ensure that proper data was collected, even if it meant a slower uptake compared to one of our competitors. That was the beginning. The end, we got to market more rapidly. We prepared meticulously for the FDA panel meeting, during which we presented the data and answered all the questions and then received a unanimous panel recommendation for approval, while our competitor at the same time was not recommended for approval. Prior to the FDA approval, we scaled up manufacturing, trained our U.S. sales force, and put in place a series of physician proctors as would be needed, and we hired additional field personnel, all before we launched the product. We work closely with the media, which resulted in feature stories in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and major news coverage on all the major networks and other journals and periodicals. We ensured that the necessary information was disseminated to referring physicians and patients, and we consulted with patient advocacy groups and major medical societies. We've interfaced with Medicare officials and payers to ensure that adequate reimbursement exists for this therapy. The ultimate goal of all these steps is to improve patient access and accelerate the adoption of this new therapy as a standard of care. And we recognize every step along the line was important. Keep in mind that heart failure is a large and growing medical problem. It affects over 20 million people around the world and over 5 million in the United States alone. It's also the single most expensive Medicare expenditure that we have and represents a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for Medtronic. How are we doing? Well, in 2 words, we're doing very well. I'm going to, next Monday, be involved in releasing our second quarter fiscal results. I tell you what they are, but I'd make you all insiders, and I know you don't want that on your back. But we will indicate that this market, remember the product was introduced just about a year ago, has grown to revenues in excess of $500 million, the most rapid takeoff of any product in the history of the medical device industry. It's also become increasingly evident that medical products and a medical products company, if they're not prepared and capable of operating across this full spectrum from product development to therapy adoption as a standard of care, they're not going to be successful in the future. All right, let me get on to the third and the final trend that I'd like to highlight today. And in many ways, it's an outgrowth of the first 2, and that is as information and biotechnology is combined with traditional medical technology to provide better options, it's clear that not one company will have at its disposal all the keys to success. As a result, increasingly in the future, successful growth companies will need to be involved in enhanced partnering. In fact, this trend is making for very interesting bedfellows. Let me further make my point by giving you just some examples of the breadth of our current partnering initiatives and some that may be ripe for further collaboration as we move forward. In the area of product development, we've utilized IBM, Microsoft, and privately held Benchmark Electronics to help design our new 2090 programmer, which was approved by the FDA within the last year. And this programs all of the active medical devices. Genetics Institute was our partner for the genetically engineered infused bone graft that I talked about earlier. Also, we licensed a novel antisense agent for coating coronary stents from a biotech company, AVI Biopharma, and we have a number of very important discussions going on at this point. The coating that we're currently using on our coronary stent was obtained from Abbott Laboratories, the company that I used to work for before. We've partnered with a number of biotech and pharmaceutical companies for compounds that we're delivering through our drug pumps. Examples include antispasticity drugs like baclofen that we got from Novartis, a non-opiate analgesic called Prialt, which is from Elan, various insulin compounds from Aventis and Lilly, and ongoing efforts with Amgen to develop proteins to treat neurodegenerative disorders. Our new CareLink patient monitoring system, this is the remote system I talked about earlier, is in partnership with UUNet and Exodus to ensure state-of-the-art secure data transmission, archiving, and retrieval. In order to provide enhanced web-based ordering capabilities for our hospital companies, we formed a global healthcare alliance with GE, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, and Baxter. When we needed help in designing our web sites and accessing the large healthcare portal capability on the internet, we partnered with WebMD, who in turn has partnered with Microsoft and AOL. In order to obtain better information transfer to referring physicians, we've experimented with co-promotions, and this is very commonplace in the pharmaceutical industry. We've done this with Cephalon in our neurological business, and we have several discussions ongoing now. Well, needless to say, this is a complex world, and particularly in the area of intellectual property, and we spent a fair amount of time talking about this earlier today. No company has everything they need, and you'll see that many companies, in fact competitors, will deal with each other to get access to needed intellectual property and patents, trademarks. Well, I'd like to conclude my formal remarks here and leave some time for some questions, but let me leave you with one final thought to consider, and that is the rate of change that we have experienced in the last decade, in my mind, is only going to increase, and it could be factorial increase over the next decade. That bodes very well for companies that innovate, that plan well, and are able to react very quickly and astutely. And companies that remember, again, a saying that I surely didn't coin, but one that's been out there a long time, and that is the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And as someone once said, the future isn't what it used to be. In fact, it's going to be a lot more exciting. So thank you very much for inviting me down to Atlanta and for your attention. And we'll take some questions. Yes.
Let's open it up.
How big a governor is the FDA process going to be on bringing all this to fruition?
The question was, how will the FDA play into this whole equation? Will they be a roadblock going forward? All of our products, again, almost all of our products go through the FDA as well as the other regulatory bodies around the world. The FDA has been a roadblock. In fact, we have taken a lead in trying to get more resources for the FDA. We did an analysis not too long ago, and we were shocked to find out that the number of reviewers in the department of the FDA, it's called CDRH, that reviews medical devices, is actually lower now than it was 5 years ago. And the number of medical device submissions is up, and the complexity of those submissions, as you've heard, I've talked about drug-device combinations, information systems, is up. On the drug side of the equation, the funding had been up, number of new drug compounds stable or down. Why? They had user fees, and when you would submit an application, the company submitting would pay a fee. Well, we had to get our industry together. We finally got them together. We negotiated with the FDA at the White House, both houses of Congress, and right before the last elections, an FDA reform bill was enacted that gives greater resources. It also talks about electronic labeling, outsourcing some of the reviews. The FDA is going to be critical in this area. I think, and we were talking about this earlier also, I think you have well-intentioned people at the FDA. However, if you took the FDA's infrastructure, their information systems, the way they process their work, and you applied it to a commercial company, that commercial company would be bankrupt. So what is going to be the challenge of Mark McClellan, who is the new commissioner of the FDA, it's been without a leader for over 2 years, he's going to have to deal with how not only does he take resources, but how does he improve the way in which the FDA does its work to make it more streamlined, without giving up the very important oversight that the FDA has on safety and efficacy. And just so I want to be clear on this point, we want a strong FDA. We do not want products coming into the market that are not safe and efficacious, but we want them to review and conduct their work in a timely fashion. Yes?
Question regarding your converging technology area. And the question I have really relates to a press release that I read recently about the Medtronic Foundation funding the work up at University of Minnesota, I think it was, with Catherine Verfai in the area of stem cells, and was curious as to if Medtronic is envisioning any product commercialization coming out of that work, or is it primarily exploratory just to see how stem cells might impact?
There's a few dimensions of your question. Let me see if I can answer all of them. To begin with, because the headquarters of Medtronic is in Minneapolis, and we're a Twin Cities and a Minnesota company, we have a very strong relationship, have had with the university over the years. Much of the funding that we have provided the university, however, has not really been utilized as well as we would have liked to have seen it. What we ended up doing was going to the then president of the university, Mark Udoff, who is no longer the president, he's gone back to Texas, and asked if we consolidate our efforts and if we put some additional money in, where are they headed? And they came back with a definition of stem cell research. And so it was in a collaboration with the university that they identified an area. We thought it was an emerging area of biotechnology, and we funded that effort. Now, the second part of your question, are there strings attached? Any funding that goes out of the Medtronic Foundation, and keep in mind that last year our contributions, charitable and civic contributions, were about $25 million. About 65% of that goes through the Medtronic Foundation. Any donation or funding that comes out of that has no strings attached. So if the University of Minnesota comes up with some breakthrough in stem cell research, we are not assured, nor do we have any right of first refusal or any other strings that are attached to that. Now, we do, through other parts of Medtronic, have relationships with different research institutions that have a much closer tie with funding and then access to what comes out of that funding, but not in this particular area. Yes?
Well, I'm not sure I wrote this down right, but did you say that 2/3 of your revenue comes from products that are less than 2 years old?
That's correct.
Well, two things. Aren't you kind of scared? Aren't you afraid to look in your rearview mirror? And don't you really need all these bright young people in this room to keep that pace?
No, yes. The point is that if you get spooked by the ability to change, and this is another theme off of this change, if you're not willing to continue to modify not only new products but the way that you're reacting in a number of different areas, the chances are that someone else is going to be innovating and pass by. So is it a little bit daunting to think about the fact that we need to not only continue to innovate in a revenue base that's now somewhere in excess of $7 billion, but we've got to keep doing this. If we're going to grow 15%, the math is you double in 5 years. So in 5 years, we're going to be, whether it's a $14 or a $15 billion corporation, and the only way you're going to continue to grow is to keep changing, keep bringing out new products, keep moving into new markets where you can add value. So that's the name of the game here. I mean, it's a rapidly moving industry. Now, the second question, and you talked about the need for all the bright people in the room, I will tell you that the single most important resource that Medtronic has is not found on an income statement or a balance sheet or a cash flow statement. It's the human resource. That's the real key to our success. It's been fundamental to Medtronic for a long period of time, and I will tell you that there's a war for talent out there. We're not the only company that has recognized this. So if we're going to continue to grow at this 15+% or greater, we're going to have people, good people, that are going to really be involved in developing this growth. So no question, that's the most important area that I spend my time on. Yes?
You want a microphone?
The trends that you listed here for the future seem to all require a lot of capital, and I was wondering what kinds of strategies would be different for the smaller company, the person that has an idea that they want to develop and maybe not want to be the child of a big larger company, but try to create their own new diversified company. How do you think they progress from A to a new Medtronic?
Let me Let me answer your question in two ways. First, a very technical comment with respect to capital. We're fortunate in Medtronic and in our industry that this is not an extremely capital-intensive industry. Now, by capital, I mean investing in large manufacturing plants. We tend to have our greatest investment be in the programmers that we make and then we put out in our various hospital locations to program our products. So our CapEx, or the capital expenditures that we have compared to other industries, are very low. In fact, ours will probably be in less than $400 million this year. Now, getting away from that whole question, and by the way, we're very fortunate as we generate a lot of cash, which for small companies is, as many of you know, is paramount. We're generating free cash flow now in the neighborhood of about $1.2 billion a year. So we're fortunate where we can finance just about anything we want to do. If we want to go out and borrow money, which we did briefly to help finance because it financially made sense, a major acquisition, we went out and did a convertible debt for 1.25% over a year ago, which isn't bad, you know, a bad rate. But to your most important question, a company that's starting, the first thing, the advice I would give is that if someone starts with an objective to be a full-fledged integrated Medtronic, the odds of that happening are very low. In fact, one of the biggest problems small companies have when they start is to broaden their horizon too far. The most effective small companies I've seen have laser focus on doing one thing and doing it very well. And until they do that well, they don't expand. In fact, interesting point, back in 1960, it's hard to believe right now, in 1960, Medtronic, right now we have a market capitalization over $55 billion. In 1960, Medtronic was bankrupt simply because they tried to expand too rapidly, and that's when the mission was written, and we fixed that. But thank God we fixed that. But I think there's plenty of opportunity for small companies to come up with good ideas, new products, particularly in the area of technology. The question is making sure that you have a very firm definition of what your product is and what your objectives are. Now, some of those companies may find to continue to grow going forward, they may be acquired, or they may decide that they're going to continue to focus in a more limited area. The other point I'd leave you with, particularly in our industry, is it would be very difficult, impossible, I would say, for any company to come into our basic pacemaker or implantable cardioverter defibrillator line simply because the intellectual property hurdles would be insurmountable. You might have good ideas, you might have technology, but you'd never get around the intellectual property. So a word to the wise on all of you, if you get involved in businesses that are generating new, novel ideas, think patent, 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 patent. And it's one of the areas that will allow you to get a sustainable capability. Yes?
You talked about the ability to remote readout from pacemakers and other devices. What's the progress of technology to modify the operational performance remotely without invasive surgery on those devices?
Well, the technology exists. Keep in mind that if you were to receive a pacemaker, an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, an implantable neurostimulator, in the surgical suite, that product would be implanted, and it could be programmed using a small head that looks like a pager that is very close to the body, and it sends, using RF energy, using advanced telemetry, signals back and forth. It can modify the settings. So as telemetry technology advances further, there's nothing that indicates that you can't not only uplink information that would be captured and be reviewed by a physician, but there's nothing that tells the physician they couldn't downlink signals that would actually go the other way and modify the device. Now, we're taking this in a stepwise fashion, but that technology exists today. What is very interesting, and I think you'll find this in a number of areas of medical technology, the technology will tend to advance much more rapidly than a lot of the legal and ethical considerations that go with it. For example, if you are able to capture this information, the question is, whose information is that? Who has access to it? There's a major law that is going into place in the spring of this next coming year, which is, it's called HIPAA. The acronym is HIPAA, Health Insurance Protection and Quality Act, or I think I've got that right. And it covers the whole question of safety and security of medical information. Another major thrust with the mapping of the human genome, my guess is that before we have therapeutic solutions, we're probably going to be able to diagnose the prevalence or the risk of certain disease states prior to being able to do something with it. What do you do with that information? Who has access to that? These are ethical and other legal considerations that over the next decade are going to be very fundamental to deal with. In fact, Bob and I were talking earlier, it may be that one of the disciplines that you include at IBB is a whole question on policy to deal with some of these issues because they're going to go hand in hand with technology. Yes?
Question.
Oh, thanks, Steve. You talked at length about large product disease states. What do you think the obligations of a growth company are for small disease states or orphan drugs or orphan products that don't draw the large income lines that you've discussed today?
I think it's an important responsibility of a leader, and we are the leader in this industry, to adapt technology to important disease states that may not be huge commercial successes. Now, I will be very honest with you, the only way that we have the flexibility to do that is that we're operating in very large disease states. We can meet our growth requirements going forward. But I'll give you an example. We have a technology right now that we have in you could categorize it as an orphan drug type of a situation, where we use a pacemaker type product to treat a certain gastric problem where many people literally can't keep food in their stomach, and ultimately they waste and they die. Is this a huge market? Absolutely not. Is it an area that we're involved in? Yes. So there's a balance here. You can also make the exact same argument for providing products into certain developing countries in the world that may not have as much of an ability to pay. So we recognize those needs exist. We try to fulfill them. But the only way you have the luxury to do that is you positioned yourself in other areas that can really fund a lot of that effort.
But is that luxury intentional in the same way that large product development is intentional from a corporate perspective?
Well, if I understand your question about is the luxury intentional, most all of our efforts are directed at trying to provide therapies that will provide, whether it's the ability to live or live a full life, to the largest number of people. I mean, heart failure is not only a major financial success, but literally we're providing therapy to millions of people. So that's
My father-in-law, thank you.
Yeah.
No.
Now, there will be times, though, that we will make decisions where we'll go into a market perhaps because it's not the largest market, but we can add value. But it's not, I don't want to leave you with the impression that this company is altruistic to the extent of forgetting about its ability to grow and make a fair profit and continue to do what we do today. So there's a balance there, but what we try to do is to use our technology to reach the largest group of people and do the most good, and by the way, that's good economically.
Art, I think we probably ought to bring this to an end, and there's several things I have to do. First, I want to give you the envelope. No, it has not been audited by Price Waterhouse, but everyone here needs to know that there is an honorarium that goes with this lecture, and Art has asked that this be donated to Penumbra, an organization in Minneapolis that focuses on African American arts and the cultural experience, and we're happy to see that happen. So,
Thank you.
thanks very much.
Okay.
Although the monetary value of this is nowhere near what's in the envelope, we hope it is something that will help you remember your visit to
Should take
Georgia
that
Tech.
top off. Let me. It's very nice. Yeah, I think this looks perhaps like the 5th building that you're going to build. Thank you. Thank
So,
you.
Art, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
As a final thing, thanks everyone for coming. There's buffet lunch out in the atrium. Everyone is invited to attend and to take advantage of that opportunity to talk to Art Collins as well as others one-on-one. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the lunch.
Just get